for joining in and coming to this little shindig. Thank you, Craig, for suggesting it and getting this all organized, and also Gabriel at Anathema Publishing. That's also very gracious. He helped out quite a bit, and all you guys for joining in and wanting to be participants. It's really awesome for me because this is kind of surreal having an author I adore and someone I follow very closely, bring something like this to me. It's very special. I'm very, very happy about that. So a lot of you, I actually already know, have already purchased the titles, some of the titles in store, but if you wanted to get any more, we posted the discount code in the Facebook group, and it's also on Instagram and kind of all over. And if you guys have any questions afterwards, you can ask me, but you should be able to get 20% off any of the titles in store at exaltedfuneral.com. So we're recording now. I'm going to hand it over to Craig here. He has a few questions already all set up, and he's going to speak about those wide range of topics. Then he's going to have open the floor up to more questions at the end, and then let's take it from there. So Craig, go right ahead. Take it over.
No, thank you so much. No, it's great to be here, and I'm glad everybody's taken time out of their schedule to listen to this. It looks like I've got about five longer questions, which are a bit detailed, which is good. And so I'll go through those, and then if anyone has any questions after that, then we'll open it up to questions. And obviously, it'd probably be easier if you turned your mic on and asked the questions at the end. I see I have a chat thing on here, but sometimes it's hard to keep up with what people are writing if I'm talking. So at the end, we'll do that. And I'll cover a lot of different topics. Some of the questions are more general, which is really nice because that helps us kind of branch out into a diverse array of kind of conversation pieces. If anyone has any particular questions on Cave of the Numinous, Entering the Desert, Cult of Golgotha, any of the Tantric Physics things, we can address that at the end. Although I might touch upon some of those as we go through the questions. So hopefully my audio is good and everyone can hear me. If not, let us know. So the first question, which someone submitted, is a really good one. It says, what are your thoughts on spiritual protection? With all the malarkey written about it in the modern age, could you talk about Eastern perspectives and personal experiences on dealing with hostile spirits and or vengeful black magic practitioners? So that's a big question. So I think overall, my answer to this question can get pretty complicated, but I want to base the entire foundation of this question from my tradition of Vedic studies and Tantra. So Tantra will definitely acknowledge that there's a world of spirits. The entire world is alive. We see nature as alive. Humans obviously have different kind of entities which can group around them. Areas of land can have entities which group around them. Cities have that. And even systems have that. For example, that's referred to as an egregore, as something just kind of comes up. So we're kind of surrounded in a world of spirits from the perspective of that. So I don't place too much emphasis on necessarily spiritual protection per se. I think fundamentally the most important thing for people to be aware of is that the more grounded they are in their self, and the more grounded and confident they are in their life, the less they have to worry about spiritual protection. I think a lot of people, when they start talking about spiritual protection, it can really go into an area of paranoia very quickly. And so I think that's something to be aware of. Now, I do think it can be a concern if people are experimenting with different systems of which they have no guidance, in which they have no experience in. And then, of course, it's kind of like poking a snake, and then they complain when the snake bites them, or rattling a beehive, and then the bees come out and sting you, and then everyone says bees are bad. So I think that some of the perspective of that is someone exploring some kind of system of which they have no experience. So if anyone was doing some kind of magical or esoteric system which was attempting to contact spirits, they shouldn't be surprised if they contact spirits. That's just how it works. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Number two, from an Eastern perspective, it's very important to think of the concept of the Atman, or the soul. And from one of the things which I write about in tantric physics and in my works is that the soul is completely immune to any kind of negative attacks. That's probably the best way to kind of wrap your mind around that would be to picture the soul as the sun. And quickly, if I would say, unless someone is asking questions, could you please mute your mic so I don't hear any background noise? Thank you. The soul is the sun. And so the sun is the ultimate radiance of the universe. And so no dark forces can affect the sun. It's impervious to that. So we always have to remember that as our soul, the inherent flame that we have inside of us, is always completely impervious to negative attacks. So the closer you are to yourself with a capital S, the closer you are in your spiritual practice to a connection to your inner flame, the less you have to worry about, quote, attacks from negative entities or attacks from vengeful, quote, vengeful black magic practitioners. Now, obviously, we can see a lot of that in, African traditions. Esoteric voodoo is a different system. It's not a Haitian system of voodoo. It's a French Haitian occultist system. So it's not so much concerned about, quote, attacks or entities like that. However, within Tantra, that is definitely the case. You often see people who are doing rituals, contacting spirits, communicating with them, particularly in left-hand Tantra or the Vama Marga, and that's why it's considered a dangerous path. And so, but once again, if someone was going to pursue that, we have to suppose that, or at least presuppose that they have a teacher, that they've received initiation to a valid lineage, and that initiation protects them. That's actually, we should speak on that for a little bit. I mean, that's one of the main reasons why Eastern traditions place such emphasis on the teacher-student relationship and the connection to the parampara, or the lineage of gurus. Be sure everyone mutes their microphone, guys. If you're connected to a sampradaya or a lineage of teachers, you're already protected even more. And so we have different layers of protection that we can kind of build up in our life. You can literally use the analogy of martial arts. We could say, like, what is the best way to help me defend myself? What is the best way to help defend myself against attacks? Well, the first thing would be to not get yourself in any kind of situations where you have to worry about it in the first place, right? So you don't go to places where there's going to be people that are most likely to attack you. You don't put yourself in a situation where you're unable to defend yourself. So that's number one. Number two is that you would maybe learn something to protect yourself. You develop a kind of an awareness. So I think that's one of the reasons why the Eastern systems were always trying to encourage the teacher-student relationship, was because it forged a bond, it forged a system of protection, and then gave them teachings and gave them practices that they would cultivate on their own, which would connect them closer and closer to the inner flame of Agni, so then they had even more and more protection. That does bring up a really interesting idea of karma, right? So if someone is going to have some kind of effect from some entity, in many ways that could potentially even mean that they karmically were destined to have that experience. And so I think sometimes those experiences are just going to happen no matter what you do, just like no matter how protective we can be when we travel or go someplace, something can happen. We can lock all our doors, someone can still break in, but that's very rare. It's not common. So I think most people shouldn't worry so much about that. I think it's very important for us to not live in fear, to not live in paranoia, to not live in some kind of obsession about being attacked or that someone's manipulating us. If that's going on, then that's already kind of indicative of half the problem. So I think we have to have self-confidence. We have to have dedication. We have to have commitment to a spiritual practice. And then also on the last level is the healthier we are physically, the healthier we are psychologically, the more balanced, the less likely we're going to be affected by any of those, quote, attacks and things like that. So I think all those things are important things to keep in mind before someone tries to memorize some kind of magical system of protection, they should maybe ask themselves, do they have a good teacher? Do they have someone to go to for advice? Are they living a balanced life? Is their nervous system calm? All those kind of things come into play. So that's kind of my basic answer for that one. So the next question says, this is an interesting question. It says, you've talked in the past about issues of improperly taking entheogens and psychedelics and the effects on the nervous system. What advice do you have on repairing / properly healing from, quote, rabbit hole excursions, which I'm assuming he means, or he or she means, just taking, you know, drugs basically and having experiences and coming back? And how often in your practice do you treat people from such that, which is a really interesting angle to that. So I do lecture a lot about the obsession with drugs in our culture. So we definitely have a culture which is obsessed with drugs. And the thing that which I find really ironic about this is the majority of people that I know who are obsessed with drug culture, whether it's like cannabis culture or whether it's like, quote, microdosing and taking out, you know, different types of hallucinogens, those are always the same people that are hugely anti-Western medical culture, which is funny because both cultures are drug cultures. So they basically jump from one drug culture, which they say they hate, and then they just race to another drug culture to try to find their answers. So from an Eastern perspective, drugs were definitely not important. And, you know, of course, every Westerner is quick to run, and then they'll Google a picture of some type of a gory in a graveyard smoking something, or they'll find a picture of that, and then they say, no, that's not true. See, this is happening. And so what they have to understand is those kind of pictures, those kind of ideas were, number one, were very symbolic. The art, what it's supposed to be. The reason why Shiva was constantly smoking something in some of those photos was because he was above it. The whole point was he was Nilakantha. He could swallow any poisons at all, and due to his Agni, it would never change his consciousness. So most people cannot do that. Most people cannot take as many substances as they want and never have anything happen to them. So that's number one. So it was a very symbolic idea. People also in the West are really losing their ability to understand metaphor, and they have a very difficult time understanding symbolism in many systems. And so they take everything very fundamentally at a level that if they see something, that means that it is what it is. For example, we can see how people are really obsessed with the concept of soma in the Vedas. And you'll see people will talk about soma, and the rishis will do these rituals to want to imbibe and drink soma. I'll write about this extensively in tantric physics. And so, of course, everyone in the Western mind says, oh, that must be a drug. That must be, and then they race to argue about what drug it is. They must have been taking some hallucinogenic drug. It either had to be this mushroom or that mushroom or this. And from a perspective, it was a very alchemical thing. It was an inner secretion that was going on. It was not something they were smoking and taking some kind of thing. It's a much more radical idea that most Westerners can't even conceive of, the idea that these people were literally changing their consciousness at a level through inner practices, through mantras and through connection to sacred areas. So we have to be careful before we quickly look at really simplistic ideas. Now, I think the first thing we have to say as from medical practitioners, if someone is going to take these substances, then we have to look at the gunic nature, the energetic nature of the substance. So is the substance synthetic, or is the substance, quote, organic? And I mean organic, I mean the sense that it was grown in the earth. So if something is synthetic or something is grown in the earth, you're already going to get a different kind of energy with that. If someone has something very pure, or if someone has something that was made in someone's bathtub, obviously that energy is going to be much different. So we have to take into consideration of that. Number two, then we have to take into consideration every energy that went into the production of that substance. So I can give a really good example of, let's say, cannabis. And let's say if someone was buying cannabis from someone, and that cannabis was grown in their basement with artificial light, and they were selling that cannabis only to make money, that cannabis will have a very heavy, dark, clouding, tamasic energy to it. So no matter what you think, when you take that substance, it's going to take on all those energies that you consume that went behind it. Now, we could also say, okay, what if that cannabis was grown outside in a field in natural sunlight? That's fine. Then we have a totally different energy to it at that point. So that takes on another energetic to it. Then you also too have to keep in mind, what was the point of that person selling it? Was the person doing it just to make money? Is the person also connected to drug cartels and all the karma that goes with, that you're going to take into your body as well too? It's a very mysterious chain of karma. So all those things are connected with that. And then I think number 3, what is your point of taking it? Why do you want to take the substance? If the substance is being taken as a form of escapism, then the problem is extremely serious. Anything we take to escape from ourselves, or anything we take to, quote, escape from the world, is number 1, a delusion. It's also, it can be very toxic to both our nervous system, and toxic to us karmically, and toxic to our spiritual progress. So if someone is able to take some substance, I guess whether it was artificial or whether it was organic based, and they were incredibly inspired and were able to write books and do art and create poetry that really connected them, then I think that would be quite interesting. Sadly, that's about 1% of what people using those substances. And so I think that's the problem. It's like people have to see, why are they taking it? What are they getting out of it? What are they doing with it? Once they have that experience, what are they going to give? What does it do for them? What do they have for them? Are they truly changed? For example, if someone has a radical spiritual experience and someone has an inner experience, or we could even say a paranormal experience, I don't know how many people have either had a true radical inner spiritual experience, and I don't know how many people who have had a true radical, what we might lump into supernatural or slash paranormal experience. But I had many of those experiences and have them, and I'm never the same after that experience. The experience changes you, and you don't go back to who you were before. That's why they're so effective, and that's also why they're so dangerous. And so if someone takes a substance and they have a fun weekend, but after that weekend's over, they go back and all their troubles are there. They haven't understood how to solve their problems any more than they have before. They're just as confused. They're just as insecure. They're just as sad. Then to me, I question about what's the point of taking it. If they take that substance and then they can change their whole perspective on life, and they don't need that substance anymore, they can kind of go on. That's the whole point. That can be quite encouraging. And so I think that these entheogens have their place. But number 1, their place is usually within a larger spiritual system. It's usually in connection with nature. And it's usually some type of ritualistic use that's going on. If all those things are involved, there is usually a system of check and balances that we can kind of ferret that out. Now, the other thing to understand too is that no matter what you do, even if you're taking something and you're getting an amazing experience and it's changing your life, or you're taking something and it's just for fun and it's just for kicks, whatever you take in, it's going to affect your body. It's this period. This is how it is. Nobody rides for free. Everything we do in the world, everything we eat, everything we drink has an effect on our body. And there's no way you can get away from that. So that might mean that if someone takes a lot of one substance, it will affect their body. Now, whether they want to consider that as damaging their body or whether they want to consider it changing their body, it all depends. It all depends on, number 1, the Sanskrit word we call bala, which means strength, the personal strength of each individual. Some people have an amazing vitality. They have an amazing ability to take anything and nothing bothers them. You know, people joke about that. Oh, look at Keith Richards. Look at this. They can just do anything and they keep going. Yeah, some people have that, but most people don't have that resistance. Most people don't have that physical vitality to be able to take substances and just kind of have the experience and it goes out their body. Usually it will damage them in some way or just age them. To me, I like to think of it more as a depletion. It just depletes us a little bit. And so if someone was taking these artificial substances, for example, let's just use a real basic idea. Let's say because this is a very pervasive thing I see in the clinic now, is so many people are smoking cannabis chronically now. they're waking up and smoking it, then they're smoking it in the afternoon, then they smoke it before they work out, and then they smoke it before because they're tired, and they smoke it because they're stressed, and they smoke it because they're happy, and they smoke it because they're in pain, they smoke it because they're not in pain. It's like every reason they can have to constantly smoke it, because also it's legal now, right? So anything that's legal, then we should just do it constantly. Since it's legal, we should just constantly do it. These are all the things I see in my practice. And these people often have things like fatigue or sleep problems. Men have low sperm count, low testosterone, other things that go on. And so they're always going to have some kind of effect from this if they're doing a lot of it. So it's just like drugs. The side effect comes with the dose. So small doses, not a big problem. If someone's doing a lot of something, that could be a big problem. So you have to look at your own genetics, your medical history. Does your body rapidly detoxify? Does your body rapidly filter out substances? Are you smoking it? Are you eating it? For example, if someone's always smoking, it's still going to irritate their lungs over time. It doesn't matter if it's really legal or if it's cool. It's really hard to find marijuana that's not sprayed with different kind of pesticides. It's the same thing with our food. So we're always around that. So I think we just have to understand that anything you do is going to have an effect on the body. If you drink a glass and you mix cayenne pepper into it, you're going to feel pretty hot. If you smoke something, if you take something, it's going to change your consciousness for better, for worse. And then oftentimes when you come back over time, if you consistently do that, it starts to damage your nervous system. So I think that's one thing to consider, is that, yeah, there will be an effect from these substances, and how much are you willing to gamble with your health on that? That's up to you. Everyone can take their own. Some people, say like, you only live once and I only have a certain amount of time and I want to have fun and have these intense experiences and I'll deal with it later. That's totally fine. That's how they choose to do it. Other people might want to take their time, selectively use it at the right time. And other people maybe have just medical problems, which makes it challenging. So all those things kind of have to come in. It's a very complicated subject, and it's not simple. And I think that's the fundamental thing that I've always taught, is that it's not so simple. It's not so simple as that this is good, this is bad, or, Craig doesn't like drugs and this, it's not that at all. I think that we just have to look at the reason about why are we seeking to alter our consciousness? What's the point of altering your consciousness? Why? Why do you need to alter your consciousness? And what are you doing when you do alter your consciousness? And when that comes back, how much does that bring you closer to an understanding of who you are? And then you need to be able to verbalize that. You need to be able to write an essay on how that's helping you become a better person of who you are. And I don't mean a better person morally. I don't mean a better person ethically. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a better person of who you really are, to connect to yourself. And so I think that's the main thing people need to ask for. I do treat that a lot, and each person's different based on what they need. Sometimes they're coming off of addictions, and so we'll use diet therapy, supplements. Of course, acupuncture is very popular for that. And then we can help them as much as they're able to return due to their own strength. Some people can bounce back and be okay. Some people are going to bounce back and be kind of okay. That's the best they're going to get. So it's tricky with that. I don't think we can always expect to take something and just never have an effect from it. I mentioned earlier about connecting to a tradition and connecting to a parampara or a sampradaya. It's the same exact idea of taking a substance into our body. When you connect to a spiritual tradition, you are going to be changed. And then for whether you like it or not, you might join some kind of system and practice it for a while, and then you leave that system, but it still affected you. You have memories of it, you've invested karma into it, and it might take a long time to shake those experiences off. So it's the same thing with substances. Depending on different substances we have, will have different effects on our body. Some people with, like, for example, food allergies is a good idea. Some people can have just a bite of a strawberry, they'll instantly go into anaphylactic shock and they can die unless they have an EpiPen. Other people maybe have the strawberry and they have a food sensitivity. Their immunoglobulin A and immunoglobulin G spikes, and so 3 or 4 days later, they have a rush of histamine in their body and they get a migraine. So it's mild, and then they stop and it goes away. So everybody's body kind of reacts differently to these substances. And so you have to find that. You have to see what your reaction is to it. You have to be honest about it. and then understand that even if something's legal, it can still be harmful to your body. That's just the reality. There's no other chasing around that. And I will say this, I do get on my soapbox a lot when I see people they'll take like a paragraph of some garbage armchair philosopher talking about an LSD trip, and they'll put it out there and try to say like it's some kind of quasi-spiritual thing. One of the biggest drug gurus out there, who lived in Hawaii and it was always spouting his absurd new age bullshit. He died of a brain tumor. That's how he died, of a brain tumor. No matter how many magical DMT trips he had, he died of a miserable brain tumor with a miserable quality of life at the end. And then this is also a guy who would tell people, oh, just quit school and just take the mushrooms and you're going to learn everything. And this is a guy who spent his entire life in academia. So he's basically had a great experience in school, got a great job doing it, but yes, he wants to tell everybody else not to do it. It's just, there's so much charlatanism connected to drugs out there and its supposed benefits. And of course, I'm colored about my experience in India. My teachers from India, that's not of interest to them. They're more interested in deeper esoteric practices. And also, I'm particularly more interested in having experiences and acquiring prana and shakti to where I don't need those experiences. That I haven't enough experiences without even having to have that. And so that's kind of where my interest lies in that. So I think most people just always need to think of their health, their physical health, their physical strength, the quality of the substance, the environment, and then really be meticulous about how much is that substance really helping them. And then also too, like how do they feel after it? How much is it harming them? And so that is the main thing, because a lot of those quote, the wording the person used in the question, a lot of those rabbit hole excursions are just total bullshit. It reminds me of, Tenacious D's movie, right? When Jack Black goes on his mushroom trip and he's in this magical land and he's getting his beautiful images. And then they cut to the reality of it. And he's just drowning in a river, just screaming, it's like, it's total fantasy. It's not true. And so I think that's what some people just need to understand. Of course, then we can get into some kind of quantum physics about what's the nature of reality and ontology and what experiences are people having. And I think that's a valid question. Everyone's subjective experiences can be very important. That's why I say, no matter what experience you're having, if you're able to take something, the idea I like to refer to it is, because this is a very tantric idea, is that every experience we have, every substance we take, every experience we have, every relationship we have, relationship with ourselves, relationship with nature, relationship with spirits, relationships to someone else, we should be able to extract something from that. We should be able to extract something from that is nourishing us. That's the alchemy of our lives. And so that's what Tantra is. We're extracting an essence from emotions. We're extracting essences from experiences. And then we're using that extraction to nourish ourselves. We have to purify it. So there's all these techniques. So you have to ask yourself, what are you extracting? What's the end game of that whole system? So I think that's the main thing with that. So hopefully I answered enough questions on that. And then the next question was really technical, and it's interesting. It says, my question is about aconite. And aconite is a substance, it's called the king of herbs in Chinese medicine. It says, said in folklore to bring the dead back to life. It's an ingredient in tendon warming liniments for carpal tunnel syndrome and other chronic injuries, also taken internally in small amounts for various things. And here we go, smoked by Agoris and Shivites. What has your experience been with this plant? Its healing power and clinical applications, ? Its context in Eastern esotericism. Aconite, called fuzi in Chinese medicine, and it's a very famous herb from the Chinese medical classic Shanghan Lun, which was a classic medical book written about cold diseases, that diseases were happening in cold climates and that were affecting the body with cold symptoms. And so they would use radically warming herbs to warm up the body and basically activate the nervous system. These herbs were, particularly fuzi, was used to rapidly activate the nervous system. Thomsonian medicine and Thomsonian herbalists use something called composition powder, which was kind of like cloves and cayenne pepper. And then sometimes if they had access to aconite, like a pinch of it, and they would give that to people who were showing cold symptoms and cold diseases as a way to kind of like jumpstart their immune system or jumpstart their nervous system. And it can be very toxic and taken internally, so I don't use it clinically. Most people don't know how to use it clinically. And there's many of other herbs that I would substitute. Topically in liniments, it can be useful as basically it just stops substance P and pain receptors in the skin, but cayenne pepper does that too. And most of the liniments or topical stuff I use would be called dit dot jiaos, or Chinese medical mixtures or kung fu mixtures. And they don't necessarily use fuzhe, or they don't use aconite. There's hundreds of other herbs they would use to stimulate circulation as anti-inflammatories. And I use a lot of those. I use them both personally for myself when I train, on my hands when we do iron palm training where we punch a lot, or on patients who need it for certain injuries and things like that. So I think it has its place. Whether or not it was smoked by Gauris or Shivites, that's who knows. And its context in Eastern esotericism, I don't really have a comment necessarily for that one. But fuzhe, it's interesting. When they talk about the folklore about bringing the dead back to life, what they mean is that it could like rapidly activate the nervous system. So there probably could have been people in China, for example, who had maybe passed out, and then once they gave that, it kind of shocked their system back. And then almost like getting an epinephrine shot, and they wake up, and then they can kind of fix them from there. So that's kind of a history of that one. That's a little technical Chinese medicine for everybody if they weren't falling asleep right there. So the next question says, this is interesting. Could you talk about the science of idolatry in the East, particularly haunted or ensouled statues or fetishism? And this person gives an interesting example. For example, Ganesh statues that drink milk. And so that's interesting. So the Eastern systems have a very, very important type of karma or yoga rather called bhakti yoga. And that's a fundamental practice in tantric physics. My entire devotion to Vedic studies, Tantra, is bhakti absolutely. And bhakti means worship. And bhakti basically sees the expression of the divine as a personal intelligence. It has a personality to it. A good way we can think about that, to get very technical since we have the time to do it, is in the Vedic text, the Srimad Bhagavatam gives an example of, they'll talk about God and they'll say, Bhagavan is the ultimate personality with a P, and Bhagavan means it's like your friend. It's a type of an entity that would speak to you literally and would show up to you. And then they would say the radiations from Bhagavan was Brahma, and Brahman was the impersonal deity, the one that was just a concept that we couldn't wrap our minds around. So the idea was that the kind of unapproachable God was just the radiations from the truly personal God. So that was the sense of idolatry or idols. Idolatry is kind of a bad term to use. It almost kind of sounds like a colonial term. So it wasn't necessarily idolatry, it was bhakti worship. These statues, these images were representations that could potentially house cosmic intelligences. And these statues, or these kind of, this person says idols, these statues basically could be activated through ritual work, and the entities and spirits kind of brought home to ground in them or kind of connected them, which often has some kind of connection to the idea of fetishes in African systems or Haitian systems. So in India, that was very common. They would try to bring the entity down into the statue, and then it was sacred at that point. It became like a sacred living representation of Ganesha, or a sacred living representation of Kali or Shiva or Narasimha, or different ones that the temple was connected to. And then over time, people would devote ritual or worship to that, bhakti. So then it kind of empowered it. It literally became almost like a battery that would radiate energy out to people so people could feel it. And you can feel that when you would walk into a sacred temple. Some people feel that when they walk into even a church. an American church or European church. They just feel a certain energy, that some of that's there through all the years of worship in that space. Some of it's the egregore of the system. And other times it's certain entities which are housed into those actual statues or images. That could be a regular statue made of clay. It can be something made of marble. It can be something made of wood, or it could actually just even be a picture, which has a certain kind of living entity in it. In African systems, the fetish usually has a type of elemental spirit grounded into that. That is a very tricky thing. That even kind of ties back into the first question about concerns about spiritual protection. Is working with a fetish, you're calling down weird elemental spirits. You have to feed them. It's basically, it sounds really cool to a lot of people in America and the West. It sounds like a really interesting thing, but it's basically like having a child forever that never leaves the house. So you always have to feed it. You always have to take care of it. And not only is it a child that you always have to feed, it's a child that gets very angry and can hurt you. It's not like a child where you can just say, just go to bed. So if we have elemental spirits that you have in a fetish, that's a very complicated tantric idea or African idea that needs to have absolutely a system of worship. Absolutely, the person needs to be trained, shown how to do it, how to keep it, how to protect it. If not, then some very weird things could be. And occasionally in these temples in India, you will often see what seems to be miraculous things, like statues will drink milk. And you'll see secretions from them. And those are very mysterious things. Some of them could be just total fakes, but occasionally there are ones that are unexplainable. And so that, and particularly in an area like India or Africa, those kind of continents, those areas have such history. It's like thousands of years, more than thousands of years. If you read the Vedas, it goes back way much more on a timeline than most people are comfortable to conceive of. You know, most of the ideas, when they start pushing back this time clock way past what Western times have been considered to be, then this whole area, the earth is just soaked in ritual. So that's why we want to go to these sacred mountains. That's why we want to go to these sacred rivers, because they actually have empowered spirits, entities that might just embody it. They don't, quote, live there. They actually, it is them. So when we talk about like Mount Kailas being the terrestrial home of Shiva, there's no person living in that mountain that is sitting there looking like Shiva. The entire mountain, the air, the land, the atmosphere is an embodiment of Shiva, the cosmic intelligence. So when you're there, you feel it, you see it, you taste it, it radiates into you. And that's where we all through thousands of years of worship there. And so in the West, we have some mountains that have that as well too. That's why the mountains became so symbolic as a great, they're like conductors of prana, they accept power. So statues can be like that too. So that's why sometimes it can be very important to, if you buy a statue or if someone gives you a statue, to ask where it came from. You know, if you know who had it before, that's very helpful. If you don't know who had it before, it's a good idea to do just a basic cleansing on it. And there's different techniques. Every system has their own techniques of cleansing just to clear the item out. Some items, no matter how much you clear it, will not be cleared, right? And so those can be very dangerous, depending if the person doesn't know what to do with them. Much like a gun. Intelligence. Is it a fiery, wrathful energy? You know, like for example, two good examples I would say would be, you know, if people would bring in, say, like an image of Kali into their house, and they were quote worshiping Kali. Well, that, you know, don't be surprised when some radical change happens in your life, and don't be surprised when some big things can fall apart in your life, because that's what Kali does. Kali, or even take things away from you. And so people, you know, that sounds really interesting until something you love is taken away from you. And then it can give a lot of pain, even though on a karmic teaching level or a greater spiritual level, that was a wonderful thing. We'll still feel pain for it. But someone could have a Ganesh statue, and it's very peaceful. It's very grounding. That's what they would give Ganesh statues to people when they were married. always kept by the front door. So as soon as someone walked in, they would see that and they would receive a blessing of it. Or Krishna was playing his flute and kind of radiating a peaceful soma, healing energy. That's a different energy. So these images have different energy. And another good example would be the kind of obsession with Santa Muerte, right? And then we can see that, for example, Santa Muerte is a very dark egregore, a very dark intelligence. Dark not in the sense of evil, but dark in the sense of it's the spirit of death. And so it is a narc saint. It is a saint. It is a spirit that people who kill people worship, and they literally sacrifice human blood to this. That has an egregore. That has a vital energy. So no matter how much you say it's not, it is. So if you bring that image into your house, it's going to have a certain vibration of that, and your relation to death will be heavily amplified. And so for some people, that's great. The idea of death around them makes them take life more seriously. It makes them cherish their moments more preciously. Other people, it brings in really paranoia, delusion, sadness. So I think it's not so much an idol. I would like to probably finish that question is say it's more about bhakti. They're actually kind of feeding what they see as a representation of a cosmic intelligence, and they're hoping that that idol will house just a fraction of that cosmic intelligence. You can think of it as a spark, like a spark of the sun flew off and landed in this little small statue. But that's not the whole sun, but it might have a small spark of it. That's the idea with that. So let's see, the next question says, my thoughts on brahmacharya and sexual repression, healing the body from depleted jing or ojas, and its connection to the virus of modernity and the techno egregore that feeds it, using internet or sexual advertising, things like that. This person's using some terms, virus of modernity, with defining what the word brahmacharya means. Brahmacharya in Ayurveda was considered to be one of the three pillars of life. They would say one of the pillars was ahara, or intake, what we eat, what we drink, what we feed into our senses. Another pillar of life was our rest, being able to rest and let your body sleep well. And the third one they would say was brahmacharya, which sometimes was translated as sexual abstinence, but it's more importantly, that's a kind of a poor translation of it. It's more about energy conservation is what it means. And so these Eastern systems, particularly this person in this question, referenced two terms. He or she said depleted jing, and that's spelled J-I-N-G. That's a concept from Chinese medicine. And the substance we have in us called jing, which is this deep kind of reservoir of energy, which is somewhat hereditary. We inherit the jing from our bodies. So however much, quote, jing your father has and however much jing your mother has, and probably jing is something which is like the activity of our immune system, the activity of our ability to activate hormones. It's just our vitality. Through intense experiences, we tend to deplete that in life. So for example, we can deplete Jing through taking a lot of drugs. We can deplete Jing by not sleeping a lot, constantly on the go, or taking a lot of stimulants. Those are all kind of like withdrawals from this bank account. We're losing it. And we can also lose it through sexual activity. And sexual activity is very symbolic of reproduction. We're making a new human being potentially from those substances. So we can really drain ourselves. So Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, were always trying to conserve sexual energy for anti-aging benefits. That was essentially what it was. They didn't want us to leak energy out. So I think that we can literally be losing energy through advertising for sure. That's why they use sexual images to sell things, because people love that. The senses go to that. They follow that and they feed that. And so when they see those images, they'll buy something they didn't know they want. They'll do something they didn't know they wanted to do. So they're easily controlled by that. Also, too, people can become sexually active, and if they're not strong enough, they become weakened through that. But some of that's cultural. We always have to understand that. Some of these are just cultural understandings of that. For example, in Chinese medicine, they were very kind of closed-minded or closed. They don't want to talk a lot about sexuality. And then you can look at India, which might say brahmacharya was very important, but then they have these beautiful books on the Kama Sutra with these thousands of images of sexual activity. They were very open to sexuality. That was not a concern with that. It was more about just the time and the place of it. So I think most people do today, they are depleted. Most people are depleting themselves by not sleeping well. They're depleting themselves by being stressed out all the time. They're depleting themselves by constant worry. And then they compound that with maybe drug use, chronic drug use, poor diet, and then also emotional dissatisfaction. Most people aren't happy with their jobs. They're not happy with their life, so that drains you even more. And then if people go to something seeking happiness, that might drain them some more. So the idea of brahmacharya is like sexual conservation. It's just about energy conservation. It was very much based on alchemy, on the Rasayana therapy in Ayurvedic medicine was like a rejuvenation therapy. They also had sexual rejuvenation therapies in Ayurveda. For example, if people aren't familiar with Ayurvedic medicine, if they are, they might be familiar with a very famous jam called Chyavanprash. Chyavanprash is a jam which has like 40 to 60 herbs, all blended in with amalaki, honey, and ghee. It's mixed up. I think it's delicious. And they would take it as kind of like an anti-aging substance. Well, it gets its name, Shyavan. Shyavan was this, from the old Puranas, the old text, Shyavan was this ancient man. They would say hundreds of years old. He had been meditating in the forest for hundreds of years. And he had been meditating so long that he was covered with roots and plants and trees. And then a young maiden was out wandering and stepped on him and woke him up. And he was very angry, and he woke up, and he had this, to make a long story short, he had a curse on him that said, whoever wakes you up, you'll have to have a child with. And so this young woman woke him up, and the old yogi was like, how can I have a child? I have no vitality left. I'm an emaciated 300-year-old man, and you're this young, beautiful woman. I can't give you a child. And so he went to the ashvans, the Vedic doctors, and they said, no, don't worry. We'll make you a special substance. We'll make you a rejuvenating substance. And so they made this substance with ghee and honey and hundreds of herbs. And the story goes, he takes it, and then he's just, bam, he's a 30-year-old virile man, transformed, ready to please the woman and have a beautiful child. Those are metaphors, right? They're metaphors for rejuvenating substances, things which can kind of bring someone back to life. And they use that image. So India was very open to sexuality. Obviously, if someone was a priest, then they would take certain vows. They were just trying to conserve their energy. Brahmacharya was more for Brahmins. Those were for priests. It wasn't for householders. Householders were expected to have children, have a happy life, have a happy family, and enjoy life. The Kama Sutra was all about enjoyment of things. So I think we have to not really kind of graft moralistic ideas about sex onto these Eastern cultures. And when they speak about sexuality, in extremity, we need to look and see, okay, what is that about? Is it a metaphor? Is it not? And then I do think that we have a very strange situation in the West, in the European mind, that now that people can become very hypersexual, but at the same time disconnected from their bodies, which is a very weird thing. So I think a lot of people have a very poor relationship with the physical body. And so sexuality can be kind of a skewed, weird way to avoid intimacy too. So it's a very complicated topic, but essentially the brahmacharya idea is about conservation of energy. And then if someone is worried about their relationship to their body, and then they need to kind of figure that on their own, whether they need a therapist, whether they need to get more active, whether they need to become healthy. That's the main thing. And in Tantra, we look at the conservation of the energy is very important, because we need a lot of energy to do certain rituals. We need a lot of energy to we want to feed into the mantras. And that's where you see the kind of tantric images of sexuality are often, they're basically esoteric alchemical symbols. A lot of that's just, once again, we're looking at a very Gnostic vocabulary. It's kind of like a certain type of spiritual algebra, which uses these equations and formulas. And then people take those ideas and connect them to mantras, to bhakti, to rituals. So sometimes it might even have the images of sexuality, but it's an inner experience. And that's a very big part of esoteric Vudan as well, too, is basically African systems were extremely positive about sexuality. They were like, that's a big part, it's part of being human. It's like eating, you know. So that's a big thing. So it just depends on their right relationship, the right environment. It's like any other substance. It's like, do they have a healthy relationship to it? And then, for example, the idea of depleted jing and the idea about ojas, which he mentions here, which is the Ayurvedic concept of jing. It's this kind of substance that can be depleted through, for example, through like excessive exercise, but it could also be depleted through excessive worry. If someone was constantly, like I see this actually more than, I see people depleted more now from constant obsession with partisan politics than I do people depleted from too much sex. When people are just obsessed constantly on the news, constantly worried about politics, constantly arguing, constantly screaming at each other, that is it's like a vampire that just sits there and just sucks all the life force out of them. And then they wonder why they're tired, and they wonder why they're not happy, and they wondered why they're sad. And so I think that's a big thing. What are you doing in your life that depletes you? And we can think of it almost like a leak, like a pranic leak. We're leaking energy somewhere. So where are you leaking that energy? Are you leaking it through too much sexual activity? Well, maybe that's a problem, but it could be you're leaking it through constant worry. It could be through constant paranoia, constant fear. So that's a big thing to think. So brahmacharya is more about just how we conserve our energy, because the Eastern systems assumed that you were basically born with only a certain amount of energy. There's nothing else you could do to make that better. You could maybe slow it down a little bit, but if not, it was just how it was going to be. And so, you can see that actually if you have done any work with hospice patients. And you can see that the idea is that sometimes someone can be extremely sick, whether it's a serious disease or whether it's just a senior, an older person, and they can be in the hospital, and then they'll say, okay, there's nothing else we can do for them. We're going to put them in hospice now. And then everyone assumes, okay, when they go into hospice, they're just going to peacefully die within like an hour. Sometimes they go into hospice and they just keep living, just months with no support. And the people are like, I don't know why this is happening. I don't know how they're living. Their body just has a certain amount of time it's going to go. No matter how much help they have, no matter how much, whatever, it's just going to go until that karmic time is allotted. And then, so that could be some people, it could be once they're home in hospice, they pass instantly. Other time it could be months, it could be years. So karmically, from a karmic perspective, we're already allotted a certain minutes of our lifetime. That's it. And so, it's like what Ramana Maharshi said to his mother. I won't say it in Sanskrit, but it was like, no matter how much you try to stop something from happening, if it's destined, it's going to happen. And no matter how much you want to make something happen, if it's destined not to happen, it's not going to happen. So the best thing to do is just to accept it and let life unfold. And so that's how much our energy too, that it's coupled with this idea that we know we only have a limited amount of energy. We only have a limited amount of jing. We only have a limited amount of ojas. So how are we going to conserve it?
and that's it. And usually for me, and from an Ayurvedic perspective, you know, we ask ourselves, well, why are we conserving this energy? So for me, as a practitioner of Tantra, I want to conserve this energy to feed it into a ritual, to feed it into bhakti to a deity. But maybe someone wants to feed it into just having more energy to be a better father, or to be a better mother, or to take care of their family, or to be a better human being to friends around them, or just to have more energy to write better. You know, someone wants to have energy so they can create more. They might have a job that they don't like. They might have relationships they don't like, and those are draining them, so they're not able to do something that they want to do. So that would be a reason why we want to accumulate as much energy as we can, because life usually takes our energy from us. Relationships take our energy from us. Every experience we have, it's a give and take. So that's essentially, I think, something to always keep in mind. It's a really good topic to kind of go off on, because people often will see that word brahmacharya and just say, oh, that means no sex. But then you can look at India, and they're filled with beautiful images about the symbols of that. And so I think it's more about just, where are you leaking your energy, and what are you doing to lose it? And for example, most people also leak their energy not only through constant worrying about the world, they leak it through obsession with technology. They're constantly watching TV. They're constantly on their iPhones. They don't spend time in nature, and they don't receive natural images. And so that can deplete their nervous system as well too. I see that particularly in my medical practices in a tech town. Everyone's in front of a computer constantly. And so it's going to have some kind of effect on them. So that's why being in nature is so rejuvenating. You can rejuvenate yourself by spending time in nature. And now people think that's like some miraculous discovery. It's really funny to me how they're always trying to reinvent words. And so when I was growing up, I grew up in nature constantly, and it was just what you did. My mom just said, leave, go out and have fun, go into the woods, go do something, I'll see you later. But now we have to call it earthing. And it's this big kind of mystical new age thing with the thing about going and standing in the grass. It's earthing. It just means, oh, you mean being in nature or camping or something like that. So I think we leak so much energy when we disconnect ourselves from nature too. So we have to remember that. So all those things are about leaking energy. How are you leaking it? What are you going to do to conserve it? And Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine is all about helping people rejuvenate that. That's one of the reasons why Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine has so much to offer, because Western medicine doesn't know how to give you vitality. Western medicine just knows how to fix when something's wrong. And it's beautiful. It's amazing. When you're having a heart attack, when your arm's broken, when you have some kind of strange hormone deficiency, it can change your life. But if you just go to your doctor and just say, your medical doctor, and say, what can you do just to help me feel better and be a stronger person? They'll be like, that's not me. Go get a personal trainer, go get a nutrition, go something else. So Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine always had lifestyle regimens, yoga, Tai Chi, herbs, certain foods, Qigong, all these practices that someone would do to conserve, to circulate their energy, to kind of live a more vital life and to prevent sickness, and also to recover from sickness as well too. So the next question says, using yoga or / ritual to harness stellar energies at certain astrological times to either increase vital energy of the body or psychic powers. Could you talk about Jyotish? So the question was basically about, I guess they're saying like, how do you harness stellar energies at certain astrological times, and can you talk about Jyotish? So Jyotish is the science of light. It's sometimes referred to as Vedic astrology. It's an intimate part of any Vedic system in Tantra. And of course, certain rituals are connected to certain movements of the stars. And particularly in India, in its system of Jyotish, it's directly connected to a relationship with planets. What is our karmic relationships? The planets are kind of like cosmic transmission points of energy. And according to the Vedas, that they would kind of dispense our karma to us. And so the complex ideas of Jyotish or Vedic astrology is much deeper, much more nuanced than your basic conception of Western astrology, when they say things like, what's your sign? or it's Mercury retrograde, that's why my life's falling apart, things like that. We don't see that as much in Jyotish. The main idea is there a certain conceptions of timing? I think that's where we need to think about it. To really break it down, it basically means like, what is the right time to do things? And so rituals might have a certain time. So we want to look at the timing of things. Where is the moon in its cycle? Is it waxing or is it waning? Where is Jupiter in the sky right now? Is it transiting something? Is it aligned with something? And so those are kind of different things which practitioners of yoga might do. They might do that to harmonize. Practitioners of Tantra absolutely would do that. However, the deeper one gets into Vedic studies and the deeper one gets to your practice of yoga, the less and less you really worry about that stuff. Once again, the metaphor I gave earlier about the closer you were to your inner sun or your inner flame, the less you had to worry about this paranoia about being attacked by dark forces. The same idea we can keep in mind when we think about stellar influences, planetary influences. The closer you are to your Atman, the closer you are connected to your inner flame, the less issues you have understanding your karma, the less issues you have understanding what to do with your life. And so the planets, basically, I think a good word to understand would be the Sanskrit word, when they say graha, they call the planets grahas, which means something which seizes you. It seizes you, it grabs you, it possesses you, and basically means it just can control you. They saw the planets as that. But as one deep into their spiritual practice, they had a better relationship with the planets, and then their life just opened up. They saw things differently. So in India, they definitely live their life in connection with the cosmos. They live their lives in connection with the stars, and it's a much more complicated idea than just looking up in a newspaper about what their sign is. Now, I've spent a lifetime studying Vedic astrology and Jyotish, and I never consult my chart. I never look at my chart when I do things. I never look at timing things unless it's for something very specific, for a strange tantric ritual, and then I will at that time. But as far as like, do I look at my life? If I'm going to go on a trip somewhere and I give a lecture, do I look at the right time? No, I don't look at I don't care of any of that. To me, it's just already, life is life. It's whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and I'm not stressed about that. So I think, once again, some people can get too paranoid about astrology. They get so fanatical about it, and they think everything's constantly. I mean, if you really stop to think about how many stellar radiations and planetary radiations were bombarding you constantly, there'd be no way you could even get through your day. I mean, like, for example, the last week, a couple of days ago, we had like a record stellar solar radiation hitting the Earth. Now, what does that mean? We don't know, but it's definitely probably affecting us in some way. But we're also surrounded by electromagnetic radiation and all these things. So I don't really worry too much about that. I think the more technical someone, if they feel a calling to Jyotish, if they feel a calling to study astrology, then it becomes their own spiritual path. You know, the study of Vedic astrology, Jyotish, is a sadhana. It's a true occult sadhana. So by studying that science, it becomes a type of bhakti, a type of worship. So if that is what someone feels called to that's quite beautiful. And when I was in India, I had, all these kind of ideas about that. And I love it. It's very beautiful to me. But do I personally follow it? Is my life? Not so much. And I definitely don't do readings for people about, like, are they going to make money, or what is their relationship going to be happy? To me, I see the reading of Vedic astrology as someone which should help us understand our deeper spiritual karma, our place in the world, our relationship to our life. And maybe it can give us some nuances to understand that. And that's in proportion to the ability of someone to understand their spiritual life. So yes, it can be important. It is a kind of a big part of an occult science of tantric physics, but not as much as maybe some people would understand. So the next question is your thoughts on reincarnation versus necromancy. How do they coexist in your system? Okay, so that's a very technical question. I think reincarnation is a very complex subject. Most people can't comprehend what reincarnation really means. And most people have this kind of very childish, new age kind of concept that, you know, their past lifetime, of course, they were somebody famous, or they were someone beautiful, or someone powerful. Most of our lifetimes, from a Vedic perspective, we've had thousands of lifetimes, both in this dimension and other dimensions. Some of those lifetimes have been horrific. Some of those lifetimes have been beautiful. Some of those lifetimes have been nothing, but they're all kind of past in there as well too. And then also we have to keep in mind, from a Vedic perspective, the universe, dimensions are multi-dimensional. The Vedas speak about this. So we could technically, if you want to start talking about reincarnation, it gets down a very weird rabbit hole very quickly. So you could be existing in 5 different dimensions now in 5 different lifetimes, all affecting each other in ways you don't understand. So our minds can't always comprehend that. Necromancy, contacting spirits of the dead, most of the things which people are contacting through necromancy are elemental spirits that are kind of stuck in certain places, or egregores that are stuck in certain places. They're not necessarily that person anymore. It's a residue of that person that's left there. Other spirits will choose to stay around certain places. Other spirits from other kind of dimensions will choose to stay, and maybe you can work with those. But as far as reincarnation, that's an incredibly complex substance, or incredibly complex idea. And most people's ideas of reincarnation they can't conceive of the idea of what even the individuality it is. For most people, this is very interesting. I'll finish this question with this, is one of the most important things about Tantra is the accumulation of power. And the reason why we want to accumulate power is so that at the moment of our death, we can remain awake, that we can remain completely clear-minded and understand that transition. So to do that, it's almost impossible. It requires an extensive lifetime of yogic study, occult study, and intensive practice. And most people won't do that. So for most people, when they do pass through the gates of death, to the great sleep, to the hinterland, to summerland, whatever phrasing we want to use, they're completely gone. Their conception of who they are is completely gone. Craig is nothing. It's just wiped off the chalkboard. There's a trace of something left, but that trace is something so beyond the memories, the experiences of that mundane life, that most people can't conceive of that. And it's just kind of like almost like melted back into the collective unconscious. That's why so many people can experience these archetypes, because they've been everything. They were everything. And that's one of the biggest complicated areas. So in Tantra, we want to accumulate energy to do that. And that's another reason why Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, what you think about at the moment of death determines your next lifetime. Please think of me. And that's a bhakti. That's the importance of bhakti, is that kind of devotional worship can save you even at the moment of death. So that's basically about accumulation of energy too. Death is a very mysterious subject. And most of the things that we worry about in life at the moment of our death and when we die, it's gone. You're not going to worry about your cell phone bill, or who was the president, or who was saying what, or what gender anybody was or what. When you're dead, all this is gone. And so hopefully you've accumulated something else that will survive. Hopefully you've accumulated something else that you've learned. And all these experiences we have in life have the potential to change us, to inspire us, to help us grow. And if we have those and we understand that, then we can spiritually mature and move on. If not, then it's just dissolved back into something, and then it comes back out again, and you start back over. You know, a really good mundane example of that would be, you know, those movies when someone is forced to relive their life over and over again, and then it takes them forever to figure out the patterns. And after a while, they finally figure out, okay, I've got to stop doing these things. And they can get a little bit further, then they die again. But they can get a little bit further, then they die again. They're like, I got to get further. Many of the lifetimes are like that. Through yogic practices, you're doing lifetimes of ritual to get to the point where you have the one chance to make that happen. So it's a big, long-term conception of time that most people don't. Most people think like 1 year is a long time. But from a Vedic perspective, 100 lifetimes might take you to get your you're to the starting line, and then another 100 lifetimes to get you halfway there, and then another 100 lifetimes to get you almost there. And then depending on how devoted you were in your spiritual practice, that would be accelerated. Depending on your past karma, that would be accelerated. So all those factors are just trying to maximize your timing of that. So that's all the questions. So now we have time. If anybody wants to ask any other questions, we can cover it. They can either send it to Matt, or if you can unmute your mics now. And if anybody wants to ask any questions.
Can you hear me, Craig?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Oh, hi. Listen, I have a question. I have several of them, but I'll start with this one. In entering the desert, at the beginning of that, when you describe the cell and how to go about establishing it and what should be in it and what shouldn't be in it, I got the distinct impression that it should be an indoor space. You talked about a small window, no electronics, this kind of thing.
Yes.
But later on, you mentioned, when you were talking about the flame rite, you mentioned a small outdoor fire. So
yes.
This got me wondering, could the cell space, could it be an outdoor space?
That's a really great question. Thank you for taking the time to ask that. I think I would give you a couple different levels of that. Number one of the most fundamental reasons about why the cell would be an indoor space is it would just protect us from the elements, right? You would see that in like the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, or certain Upanishads would talk about the space of your meditation needs to be covered. You need to have a roof. It keeps the wind off of you. You need to have a comfortable seat. It was basically just making it easier to do your prayers, to do your ritual. So I think number one, the cell is nice to have inside because it just kind of keeps distractions out. Basically the cell is something that we're trying to create, to build, that cuts out all distractions, that we can just kind of focus strictly on our sadhana, strictly on our spiritual work. And so that's number one. So that's the benefit of that. A private space that's closed off, maybe that allows, I like the window to natural light is ideal. If you don't have that, that's not necessarily a problem. But we're also trying to build through our practices in that cell, we're trying to build the inner cell, what I call the inner sanctuary, so that we take that with us anywhere we go, so that eventually you have an inner ritual space wherever you are. And then in entering the desert, the idea was I'm trying to awaken your sacramental vision. I'm trying to awaken that, and that the key part of that is being in nature. And so we want to see we would call the theophonic expressions of nature. We want to see the radiances of nature that are constantly whispering the Gayatri mantra. The rays of the sun are constantly vibrating the Gayatri mantra. The buzzing of the bees are constantly vibrating the mantras of Kali, or the beautiful sounds of Krishna's flute are always around us, but we just can't hear it because our ears are numb to that. And so outdoor connections, and particularly fires outdoor, around fires, are very important and very conducive to reconnecting us to that. So I think both are important. Like we have to have the cell, the physical cell, to do private ritual, but then that should be building an inner fortitude. And then we should spend time in nature, outside rituals, to reconnect with that as well. A good example would be like, I have many ritual rooms, special spaces I do rituals in, and they have over time, when you do ritual in one space, that space starts to take on its own energy, so that when you walk into that space, it's instantly there. You're just there. So that's a benefit too. It makes it easier to do that. But if I'm traveling somewhere and I'm in a hotel room, I can't just say, well, I'm in a hotel room, so I can't do this ritual. I can't do my sacred ritual now. No, it should be the mindset that, okay, no matter where I am, as long as I have some privacy, no matter what was going on, I can get into my cell space mentally, and that interior ritual is happening. So that's one part of it. And then we need to be somewhat independent. And then outside, the flames outside, that's why so many cultures have fire worship, because just being around a fire at night or during daytime, it can really reconnect us to these elemental images that awaken that inside. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder about maybe using the outside space at night in terms of what you were talking about eliminating extractions or distractions rather.
Right.
I find I really tend to be somewhat nocturnal, and I
Sure.
think that largely I like the night because there's less of all of the crazy energy of the day sucking
Yes.
your energy away. So
That's very true. Yeah. Yeah. That's why you would get a lot of powerful meditations extremely early in the morning, the Brahma Muhurta hours from like 4 a.m. to 7 a.m., but also late at night as well too. And so we can really use that as to once again, we're back to timing. We can use the right times to do that as well. So,
okay,
did you have
great,
another question you had?
Oh, I do, yeah. Let me pick out another one that I think is kind of more important. In your second essay in The Scalding of Sapientia, Container of Flesh, it was titled, you mentioned the Grimoire Geta.
Yes. Has
that been published? Will it be published, or is that something meant to be kept secret?
That's more of a secret teaching, and that's a good question. The Grimoire Geta is a body of teachings. It's a body of esoteric teachings that are contained within the practitioner's flesh and that are activated during certain rituals. And there's also actually certain secret teachings which are maybe written down and transmitted through that as well too. So that word is kind of symbolic about the overall kind of teachings of that, the teachings of death, the teachings of the flesh. And then there also are some private ritual teachings as well too. All right.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking the questions. Any other questions, guys? All right.
Craig, I have a question.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So, what should be your relationship with the food? How useful is the fasting in spirituality? Because I have read contrary views. I have practiced fasting for a long time, but in Gandharva Tantra, I came across a passage where it says that fasting is a sin. In fact, in Gospel of Thomas also, Jesus seems to be saying the same thing. Fasting. Right. So tell me, what is all about this first with fasting, and does it really? I mean, I just want to understand the relationship of us with food, because in Indian traditions it is said that in Kali Yuga the prana resides in Anna.
Yeah.
So how do you find a middle path, or what exactly it is?
Yeah, that's a very insightful question. I think that fasting has its place for different things, depending on one's dosha, for example, in Ayurvedic medicine, and depending on how much ama or internal toxicity someone has, then we might want to fast from certain types of food. Number one, we might want to fast from sugars, or fast from alcohol, or fast from excess fatty foods. Or, for example, if someone had a poorly functioning liver, they would have to fast from proteins because they would have to go on special diets. So depending on certain things in the body, we would take that out. Fasting for spiritual practices was often used just to help focus the mind away from exterior bothers. And basically people were saying, like, it was kind of a bother to eat something, and then that would kind of take away from their spiritual practice. Also, too, consuming and eating food does use our energy up. There's an energy expenditure, so they were trying to kind of accumulate energy again to use for the prayers, use for the ritual. However, fasting can be very hard, and fasting can make people feel very weird. It can throw their blood sugar out of balance. And when you look at most of the yogic books, and they would more often do like mono fast. You would often read in the yogic books, they were fasting, but they were drinking milk all the time, or they were eating only milk and raisins or something. So they still had some kind of sustenance coming into them. Or someone would do a khichdi fast. They were only eating khichdi and that was it. And so they were still having something that too. So I think there's a role for it in that. And then it definitely, giving your body a break from foods does for a lot of people, they feel better. And then of course now,
in different types of diets, they're kind of promoting what they call intermittent fasting, which is, people don't eat. And the idea was that if they're fasting, then their body starts to use their fat stores for energy. And that way they're not having to consume the food. It depends on the person and how that works. There's not a lot of good research on whether or not that's super functional. But I think that using the fasting as a sadhana, for example, if you're someone's going to fast all day until the evening, and then they have a small meal, they can kind of offer that up as bhakti or offer that up as your tapas to a spiritual practice. Then it has its role in that, if someone is so inclined. But we could also say, well, what are you fasting from? Are you fasting from food? Or are you going to say, I'm going to fast from technology for a day or for a week? Or I'm going to fast from watching something or listening something? Or I'm going to fast from thinking about something, and so you can pick about what you're fasting from. And during the Kali Yuga, there's so much craziness going on. So often really, really radical and unconventional things work. But also we have to remember too, in the Kali Yuga, they would say the most powerful techniques were bhakti, the names of God, or saying the names of God, kirtan, bhakti, and tantra. And so that is too. So one doesn't necessarily have to. I think if someone does fasting, they do it correctly, and they can be very healthy. But some people, if they don't know how to fast, they can throw their body out of balance. And then the other problem is when you do fast, your body will release toxins into the digestive system to get out, and that's in theory a good thing. But sometimes people feel worse when that happens. And so that's not always a good. And so depending on if someone doesn't have a doctor there guiding them, or like in Panchakarma, someone's guiding the therapy, if they don't have that, then they can kind of mess up their system. And then what you do post-fast is important. So for me, I think I always lecture people, and I used to lecture a lot on this with Ayurvedic lectures, is things to do to prepare your body for a fast. And then there's things you do to recover from the fast. Ayurvedic medicine has really key ideas about that, and that's never usually taught. Most people just do the fast and then that's it. So there needs to be a preparation for the fast and then a way to break the fast. So it has its role, but I think you need to be careful. You need to know what you're doing, and if it's something that you feel that it's helping you in your spiritual practice, then it can be quite helpful. Does that answer your question in some way?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Any other questions, guys? All right. I think that's it. We went about an hour and 20 minutes, so that's good. I'm glad. I was honored to speak to everybody. I hope everybody enjoyed the talks. And I appreciate Exalted Funeral for doing this, and Anathema Publishing. So they're doing a great, if you wanted to buy a copy of the books, they're doing wonderful discounts, which is really a nice thing to do. So namaskar.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Craig. That was intense. That was awesome. So I hope everybody had a good time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was like getting a dissertation right there.
Excellent.
So that was great. Very informative. So thanks, everybody, and have a good evening. So anything else to add at the end there?
No, thanks. I appreciate everyone coming and spending the time. Have a good evening.
Mm-hmm.